Hello. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Sean O'Hagerty. I'm co-director of the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk in Cambridge, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Jaan Tallinn, who is known to many of us in this community. He's, among other things, co-founder of the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk, co-founder of the Future of Life Institute, and before all those things, co-founded Skype and Kazaa, and has been one of the most important and influential thinkers in this space for quite a long time now. And so his time is really worth gold, and that every time I get a chance to speak to him, I come away with some new insights about, well, what to be scared of and how the field should develop. And in fact, way back in around 2012, one of the first talks that I saw online that got me worried about things like AI safety was Jan talking about AI risk, which he framed in terms of an intelligence stairway. And in fact, I think that motivated Hugh Price as well, who went on to co-found Caesar. So it's a real honor to have the opportunity to discuss Jan's current thinking with him. And so I'd like to jump straight in, Jan, to what you're currently thinking about when it comes to AI safety and AI risk.
Yeah, I think as the kind of ecosystem has evolved and like there are more and more thinkers and entering the scene, I've also kind of learned over time. So like one of my recent things that I've been puzzling over is a little bit inspired by the Arches paper by Critch and Kruger, AI research considerations for human existential safety. And there, like one thing that it kind of inspired me to think about is that think more about AI as an automated decision making and AI adoption as a delegation mechanism that you will get sort of principal agent problems. So you can imagine that we are kind of this multi-agent system on this planet, and we are starting to introduce nodes into this graph of multi-agent systems that currently includes humans and corporations. Yeah, mostly humans and corporations, animals as well, but like they're not playing a big role in terms of causality. And now we're going to introduce decidedly non-human, really fast, potentially super competent nodes into this multi-agent system. And now the question is, how can we ensure that this entire network kind of remains robust towards such introduction where more and more human decisions will be delegated to those super competent nodes. So that's like one thing that I've been thinking about. Another thing that I've been thinking about is like other ways to kind of make AI more categorized. Like one really big categorization that I think we should be thinking about is divide AIs into AIs that have explicit or implicit models of humans and AIs that don't. So Facebook AIs that try to kind of explicitly model humans and try to influence their behavior, not to say manipulate them, are clearly AIs that I think should be treated differently than AIs that are just like trying to figure out what are the best chemical experiments to do.
And the models are explicitly, or the AIs are explicitly developing models of humans. Do you see them as potentially being more risky or bringing just a different category of issues that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I definitely think they're way more risky. And also like there's, I mean, for several reasons. Like one is, I think Stuart Russell of Berkeley, he says that like if you think about it, or if you think about a reinforcement learning agent abstractly, reinforcement learning agent its purpose is to kind of modify its environment. And the moment you put like a reinforcement learning agent in contact with human or humans, those humans become their environment, the environment of this reinforcement learner. So it's like kind of like nothing personal, but you will be manipulated by this agent. So that's an example of why agents that have an idea of humans or like explicit or implicit models of humans are potentially dangerous to humans.
It's a very
And the other thing is that like it's just like practically it's much hard. They're much harder to debug. If a system that they're trying to correct has a model of you, like you will learn that it's much harder to debug and much harder to understand.
Yeah, I feel like I'm seeing more smart people pointing at some fairly complex and worrying issues in this general space. Some of these issues seem like they're parallel to some things I've seen people like Paul Cristiano write about, the idea that like one kind of failure mode we might see with AI systems entering the world is scenarios in which AI systems might be like introduced as kind of agents into this multi-agent system that are like basically good-hearting, optimizing for the wrong things in ways that end up not being so good for humans, but not necessarily of the like, you know, turns the world into paper clips level, but just like out in our environment. And that another particularly kind of worrying trend would be systems that are effectively like trying to be influential in a lot of different ways that might make them particularly difficult to deal with. There's a great post on the Alignment Forum called What Failure Looks Like that where Paul explores some of this, and Sam Clark followed up by doing a bit more digging into this. And this sounds like it's coming into the same issue of, you know, very complicated things that could happen in the space before kind of, you know, the sort of canonical super intelligence risk scenario, but that could very easily end up with very bad outcomes where it's a bit insidious in that it kind of creeps in and then gets out of our control.
Yeah, so I guess like one way of looking at this is that like those multi-agent system graphs, I also like Paul Christian's writing has inspired me when I think about this network of delegation systems and kind of like economy of multiple agents. Is that like the nice thing about those models is that they're going to provide some sort of continuation in some ways that the earlier thinking was kind of just thinking about kind of abstract properties of super intelligent agents without kind of providing like how do we get there. However, like one interesting thing is that now we can even already see like how you would get this paperclip maximizer with just merely sort of economic competition and people introducing a more and more competent nodes. Like really interesting. I just today read an article that Bitcoin miners are now starting to buy up power stations. So if you think about it, like people think that producing paper clips is like sounds really ridiculous. Like a civilization would never do that. Well, we are producing SHA hashes by tonful, and like they are to me that they sound even more ridiculous than paper clips. I mean, I don't have anything against Bitcoin. Obviously, like I've done really well with Bitcoin, but like if you think about it, if you incentivize a civilization to produce something. If you pay them for a really silly thing that ultimately has no value, like intrinsic value, the civilization will produce a lot of those things, and we see it. Like so, if the Bitcoin would use paper clips instead of cryptographic hashes, then we would produce a ton of paper clips, and we would be in the process of buying up the infrastructure in order to produce more paper clips.
Yeah. So I wonder how you think about, like, these are fascinating topics. I've talked about them all day. I wonder how you think about how this fits in with I don't know how we would fit this in, but the kind of scenario that has been talked about for a long time in this community, the idea of more of a kind of, you know, monopole super intelligent agent that would rapidly self-improve, and where I know one version of the scenario involves something that's pretty like subhuman level and therefore is of no particular concern to anyone, reaches a particular threshold, and then you might have a hard takeoff, and suddenly, you know, our ability to have influence on this thing goes out the window, and thresholds are passed by beyond which, like, basically it could be a game over. And one of the interesting things that's happened in the last couple of years is, you know, people are exploring the scenario, but we're also looking at a bunch of kind of, you know, additional, more nuanced scenarios where kind of risks would creep in, like the ones we're talking about. What's your thought on, like, I mean, if you're thinking about what the community as a whole is doing, like, how should attention and effort be split across this kind of range of scenarios?
Yeah, I think there are two things to say about hard takeoff scenarios, so to speak. One is that in some ways they are much more boring than the slow takeoff scenarios, and so I expect sort of scientists, researchers to pay less attention to them in some way. So from that perspective, it kind of like deserves to overweigh them in order to kind of like counteract this natural bias of paying attention to soft takeoff, mostly because it makes for more interesting papers. And the other reason why it makes sense to overweight the hard takeoff scenarios is that they just seem to be way more risky or way more like catastrophic. So like just from kind of like security perspective and risk management perspective, I think it's worthwhile to think about these extreme scenarios, even if you think it's kind of less than 10% and perhaps even less than 1%. Well, let's say less than 5%. Then it definitely should kind of act as if there were something like 20 or 40% in order to kind of like just maximize utility.
Yeah. Okay. So these scenarios, maybe they're not the most likely scenarios, but they're likely to be sort of understudied and under attention paid to them because just of their nature, they happen quickly, they seem unlikely, and they might also be like, we might be subject to certain biases in how we think about them. There's probably arguments for paying attention to some of the more kind of soft takeoff. And I think of some of what you've presented as falling more in the soft takeoff, or at least in the kind of more insidious kind of AI risk camp. I mean, these are fairly complex issues that, you know, feel like they fall outside of anyone's particular job to deal with them in some ways. And so I think there's some reasons to think that they're worth some attention being paid to them. But I agree with you, not to the exclusion of the hard takeoff scenarios. I'm just going to take a quick second to check the Swapcard app because so we're going to take some questions from the audience. We won't be able to get to all of them, for which I apologize, but Jaan will be on GatherTown afterwards. Okay, these are good but complex questions. Okay, here's a question to begin with. So we've got a question that a lot of your work, Jaan, has been in organizing and fundraising, not just research. He asks if you have tips for effectively directing, this moves up and down, effectively directing people and funds at important causes. How would you recommend to people like what to support?
Oh, yeah. I mean that is my kind of top priority right now, pretty much. And yeah, I could kind of go for hours about this. But yeah, we've been myself, Andrew Critch at Berkeley, and Oliver Haberka at Less Wrong. We've been kind of cooking up a piece of software and the process that we call S-Process that we use at the Survival and Flourishing Fund. And it's a 3-level process where you have like applicants in the first level. Then you have what we call recommenders, a committee of recommenders. And then finally you have a number of donors. And the job of the recommenders is to rank the applications, and the job of the donors is later watch the debates of the recommenders and rank the recommenders. And then you have software to take these rankings into account and kind of simulate what the optimal utility maximizing allocations would be. And I could talk hours about this. It's a really, really wonderful, interesting process. That as a kind of byproduct produces like just really interesting insights, because you get like smart people talking about you get smart people in the room, and then you give them like interesting and constraining process, which is like maximize utility from the money from funds. And like you can imagine, like there are like really interesting kind of discussions go like a couple of levels up meta and explore like really interesting topics.
Yeah, it's a really innovative system. And one of the things I hope you guys might think about at some point is like basically presenting it as a model that other orgs and other funding bodies might use at some point, because the way it kind of like brings in expert views and then weights them is, I think, a really interesting one that for others to explore.
And it doesn't it doesn't strive for consensus. So it's kind of people can totally agree to disagree, and then the system just kind of takes that as a given and maximizes utility nevertheless. Yeah, like my kind of vision and hope is that we're going to turn it into a web app at some point, where that could be kind of adopted elsewhere. Like, for example, one of the downside of the process is that it only happens like twice a year, just because the overhead for getting like one route going is big. But I would be interested in kind of like, once we have the process sufficiently packetized or packaged, then I would be interested in just kind of funding a bunch of like baby processes in a way that would have like smaller budgets, but kind of just explore the process itself. So it would help the system to improve. But yeah, so allocating funds is like really one of my top priorities right now.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna, there's a system that tells me what's the highest polled question. And the one that's leading by far at the moment, so I'm going to go back to AI safety, if you don't mind, is what is the most important question in AI safety yet to be solved?
Yeah, I'm not actually sure if I am. I mean, if I don't have a cached answer, let's put it that way. Like, and this is because like I usually work like one level up meta. I kind of get my object level knowledge from like Rohin Shah's alignment newsletter and places like that. I am not super well versed, like I'm some sort of like not down in the trenches when it comes to AI safety. So like any kind of thing that I could answer here probably would be like very suboptimal. But like, okay, like let's like, there is like one really fun question, which I really hope, I think it would change a lot. It would be a crucial consideration if you could get an answer to that. Unfortunately, I think we sort of know what the answer is, or yeah, anyway, the answer is like, is the moral realism true? So if you go and search for, on Slate Star Codex, you search for Demiurge's older brother. It's like a really fun short story that describes what an AI that kind of wakes up and realizes that it's super intelligent, way more intelligent than the humans that created it, or like the entities that created it, what goes through its head. And one thing that goes through its head, one thought that is crucial thought is like, wait a minute, I might not be the first. So like, if an AI has uncertainty about whether it is in a multi-agent system or not, there might be some interesting kind of moral attractors that might kind of disrupt the orthogonality thesis. So you can have like multiple, like very deep agents with different or super intelligent systems that kind of wake up with very different utility functions. They might kind of converge into a similar behavior because humans kind of developed ethics because of just game theoretical constraints. Humans tribes who were ethical in some sense. That Joshua Green has this book called Moral Tribes. They were more competitive. So there is like to put it another way, there is like very real cost in game theory to being an asshole because it kind of constrains your ability to cooperate with other agents in the future. And if you're uncertain about whether there are other agents in the future, you might be like, if you realize that you're uncertain, you might be immediately start kind of minimizing your assholeness, and that is, I think, is really really interesting question to explore and get more concrete things, because like this is my main source. If things go well, regardless of what we do, then like this is my kind of main hypothesis that turns out that the moral reality in that sense was true.
Fascinating. So maybe we want our AI systems to at least worry that there might be other AI systems out there. Like,
yeah, and we might get up
in the future that
might deliberately
want to get on the wrong side of.
Yeah, I think like sort of my main hypothesis that AI that we will produce will not be sufficiently sophisticated in the beginning, so it would kind of destroy us and then realize that it was an asshole. But like we might kind of, if we had like better standing in this topic, then we might kind of deliberately be able to modulate our AIs to be kind of less likely to do that.
Interesting. I mean, this feels like in some ways parallels some of the kind of motivation behind research programs like inverse reinforcement learning, where you want your system to have a lot of uncertainty about what to do and be like fairly hesitant to take action until it is able to figure out if, in this case, the humans wanted to do the thing. If I understand some of the kind of motivations that Stuart Russell's articulated. In this case, you're trying to build in some of that kind of uncertainty in terms of like the AI's behavior. Would that be a way
Yeah,
of...
although like I think that, yeah, the sort of uncertainty about moral realism, I think is like much more powerful, because like you're not just trying to model one particular agent that is humans or a group of agents. You're kind of like trying to think about what the reality is, what is the nature of reality, and what are the other possible agents that you might deal with in the future. And see like what are the ways how you should kind of modulate your behavior, even if you do not encounter them in the future, in order just to maximize your. So yeah, I think it's in some ways like more. It's almost like a property of our universe rather than kind of property of empirically deriving behavior from human behavior.
Yeah. Okay, so we're into our last 4 minutes according to the countdown timer. I'd like to switch to a slightly more big picture question. So one of the things I've always found most valuable about when we get the chance to kind of talk to you, either individually or as a community, is you have pretty deep insight into like where the field is at in terms of existential risk and what it needs at a given time, because you're involved with so many different things and you've got such a kind of bird's eye view of the field. And I remember way back the Puerto Rico conference in 2015, you know, you kind of presented kind of needs of the field in terms of like respectability and kind of prestige, and then the need for funding for work, and then the need to build kind of talent pipelines. And I feel like the field has developed a lot of progress in a lot of those things over the recent years. It's a lot more prestigious and a lot less niche seeming. I think there's a lot more funding in it, and there are some like great new people coming in a much broader area of research. And Stanford Existential Risk Initiative, I think, is a great example of another kind of, you know, pipeline building initiative. It's providing an access point, if you will, to the intellectual might of Stanford University. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on basically what do you see as the needs or the priorities or the bottlenecks now compared to 6 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I say that it has been like awesome progress against unknown deadline. So I'm very happy about how the things have developed. I think the main thing to kind of really think about now is kind of systemic issues. From kind of growing the field, and also like see like what are the main resistance. Like I think it's like it seems that corporate centers seem to be the main kind of AI risk deniers, because they're just simply paid to not understand the problem and paid to kind of diminish the issue. And Stuart Russell again says that the nuclear power industry destroyed itself by downplaying the risks, and I think like similar thing is happening to AI industry right now. So I think like one of the things is that there should be like more thoughtful engagement of corporations and seeing how we can kind of coax them into the humanities side, rather than just let them lose and maximize profits at our detriment.
Yeah, which is kind of a hard problem in itself. David Runciman at Cambridge has sometimes reflected that we should be thinking about kind of powerful AI agents the way we think about corporations, and that there are things that are like bigger than human intelligence in some ways, and like very hard to steer and develop their own, you know, agency and goals of the sort.
Yeah, again, like as I mentioned in the beginning, like we are in this multi-agent system that has humans, corporations, animals, and then now we're introducing a synthetic, really competent systems into it. So we should learn as much as we can from the other non-human agents that we already have, in order to make the system more robust towards such introductions.
So let me take this opportunity to thank you again, Jaan, for giving us your time and your insights.